Welcome. Thank you for joining us for this week's cross-industry webinar with Boulder County Public Health. My name is Corinne Waldow. I'm the Senior Director for Economic Vitality at the Boulder Chamber, and I want to thank you for joining us. This is a partnership with all the local chambers and economic vitality partners within the county to help you stay informed about local public health orders that affect your business in the reopening. At this time, we're going to hand it off to Boulder County Public Health because they have a lot of updates on numbers, local public health orders. But as always, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A box or in the chat, and we'll get them answered as best as we can. If you have a very specific question, make sure your name is put into the question so that we can answer it either through the session or afterwards in an email. Jesse, why don't you take it away?
Thanks, Corinne, and I apologize in advance. My connection is slow today, so I'm going to be off camera. But just wanted to jump in quickly here. As we do every week, I'll start with an epidemiological update, talk about the dial status. We'll do a public health order update, and then a little bit on Halloween guidance, and then get to Q&A as quickly as we can. But I think there are a lot of really important updates this week. So, as we talked about last week, there's been a decline in the number of new cases, which is great. Our 5-day average is down. It's not down as low as it's ever been, but it is getting down there. And I think that's a really important part to keep in mind as we talk about the rest of what's happening with public health orders and with Halloween guidance. It's really important to understand how much our actions as individuals impact this overall number. Glad we're seeing this trend, but keep our actions in mind as you think about that. So part of that, part of the huge uptick was an increase in CU affiliated residents getting positive tests. And as you can see from this chart, that portion of our population has actually gotten fewer and fewer positive tests, and that's really good news. So as a result, we're still seeing, we saw that huge uptick in people between the ages of 18 and 22 with positive tests. Now we're seeing that drop off. And while we are seeing an increase in other populations and other age groups, we're not seeing a huge increase in those other age groups. So that's something we're watching, but we're confident that the actions being taken are having a good effect on all age groups at this point. So another thing that will come up in a moment when we talk about the dial and where we are on that is the PCR positivity tests or rate. And I just wanted to show that we had a huge uptick in tests that coincided with our increase in positivity. And at the same time, we've been able to keep that proportion, that percent positivity, pretty low. It did increase, and that has an impact, but it's been kept pretty low thus far. So we are still in level 2 concern. There was, at the end of September, we started consultations with the state because our numbers were in a state where we might not be able to stay at safer at home level 2. And to talk about that specifically, these are the metrics that they're using to figure out where we are. We were seeing numbers for new cases in the greater than 400 per 100,000 2-week incidence rate. So that was putting us into stay at home. We were still seeing pretty good percent positivity and stable or declining hospitalizations, but that new cases number was very concerning. And so based on the updates from earlier this week, just wanted to update us on all 3 of those metrics. We're well down from our peak in terms of 2-week cumulative incidence, and we are headed in the right direction. We're continuing to see low daily positivity numbers, and that's going to help bring that number down. We're right now in safer at home level 3 there, but for our 2 other metrics, that's at those are in the good area, and that's really important because I think as we talked about last week, and I'm not going to go into a ton of it this week, so I just want to stick with this slide for a minute. After we saw that increase in the 2-week cumulative incidence, we went into consultations with the state. We developed a mitigation plan that we sent to the state. The state looked at it and said, yes, this works for us. We think that you have a good plan for how to deal with this. And it really was activities that we're already doing, actions we're already taking that they approved of. And so we, until the 14th, are staying that course and trying to really address that. One of the things that we did say in our mitigation plan was that we were going to update our local public health order that impacted 18 to 22-year-olds. And changes to that just came out. And I'm going to hand this over to Lane to discuss what's staying the same and what's changing with the new local public health order.
Thanks, Jesse.
Thank you.
So we'll start with the things that are still staying the same with the order. So really, again, still focused on that target age demographic that was really causing the spike in the outbreak. And this is, again, specific to the city of Boulder. So really, face coverings must still be worn. And that's, again, following all of our state and local ordinances that are requiring face coverings. Still need to do social distancing. And then especially wearing face coverings outdoors when you can't social distance. The gatherings is with one other person. So basically 2 people that are 18 to 22 is okay. Any more is starting to be a violation. For really significant enforcement though, we're really going to be looking for more egregious issues. The large gatherings of parties, people not masking and not social distancing, and large groups, that's what was really the driver of the disease. So, but that being said, any more than 2 is still not allowed. Those folks can go to work. The one caveat is those properties that were under stay-at-home order, there's going to be some efforts to start to remove them from those stay-at-home orders. So once that's done, all those 18 to 22-year-olds can then also return to work. But otherwise, until we get all those plans in and approved, that component is still going to be in place probably until some portion of next week. But it's also dependent on those plans getting submitted. The students need to also continue doing the daily monitoring and then also symptom checks. And also we really want to make sure that they're doing overall testing, so that the university, as Jesse showed, there's been a huge increase in volume of tests. And so we want to still sustain the testing to make sure we're catching ill individuals. And then the next slide is going to kind of focus on the things that are more significant changes. So for that 18 to 22-year-old demographic, again, within the city of Boulder, we're going to look at sort of in 2-week increments how our metrics are looking. And as we see hopefully improvement, there will be more and more opportunities for gatherings and sort of less and less restrictions placed on that demographic. So the goal really is to get back to that baseline where we were at the end of August before we hit that real big spike that started in September and then just kind of kept spiking in September. So once we're kind of back to our baseline, then we will see all the restrictions removed from 18 to 22-year-olds. So again, as we can step through that, you'll see less and less restrictions. And certainly every time we move to a less restrictive phase, we'll be updating all of you. But that's, again, intended to be sort of 2-week increments to evaluate and see where we're at. So right now, everything is staying exactly as it has been for the next couple of weeks. The stay-at-home orders, again, for those collegiate group homes, will be lifted based on our approval of their plans that they submit. And it's really a matter of them making sure that they can address the need to quarantine and isolate if they have illnesses, that they have capacity to do that. They're adhering to all the public health orders. They're not going to have larger gatherings. They're also going to be supportive of making sure their folks are getting tested. And then certainly if there is any illness, they are going to cooperate with the need for doing the contact tracing for other people who might have been exposed. So the stay-at-home orders for the non-group collegiate properties that didn't have any violations, which really is all of them, we didn't see any significant need for enforcement. There were no problems really at any of those properties that were identified. All of those properties will be lifted as the new orders go into place tomorrow. So all those other apartments and other non-group housing that were identified in the order, that will all be lifted tomorrow.
Awesome. Thank you, Lane. And this is shifting gears significantly, and we can definitely answer questions about the new public health order during the Q&A. Halloween guidance did come out last week from the state, and this I really recommend that you find the guidance online. I think Corinne is going to include it in the email that goes out. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. But if you're planning an event, read the guidance. It's a lot of common sense. It's a lot about trying to stay local with your events. But I guess the big things are follow the event guidance that already exists. So your numbers, your density is going to be the same. There's no change to that. They're really encouraging outdoor events for obvious reasons. One thing that has come up a lot, and just want to reiterate it here, a Halloween mask is not a COVID-19 appropriate mask. So you need to be wearing a mask with your mask. If you have a mask on, if your kid has a mask on, that does not count as a filtering mask. So double masking is important in this case. And then for events, I just put this in there because I've been talking to a couple places that are planning events, having unidirectional flow with spacing. So in other words, as people go into whatever you're planning, make sure that they're all going in one direction, and make sure that there is a way to enforce maintenance of that spacing between parties as they go through. Just thinking about how to limit bunching up, grouping either at the beginning of an event or at the beginning of say a maze or a trunk or treat is something that people have been talking about. How do you keep people in line spaced out? But then once they're in the event, how do they stay spaced out as well? So just things to think about from the Halloween guidance.
Jesse, before you move on to the next slide on this, can you go back to Halloween?
Yeah.
A lot of the conversations I've heard about Halloween are, making sure that the practices of COVID are maintained.
Yes.
Social distancing. We don't stay in one spot around people for long periods of time. So 6 feet of social distancing, don't stay around people for long periods of time, making sure that you disinfect products, wearing masks, that single directional traffic. We're talking about, just a lot of those items that we continually talk about in terms of businesses and flow of traffic, are part of the guidance that came out with the Halloween guidance. And so, just those same things that we talk about, came out with the Halloween. And I know there was just conversations and, funny and jokes and things like that. But I think if we continue to have these conversations around the Halloween, we can continue to put those practices in place, even on things like Halloween.
Absolutely. And thank you for that, Corinne. I think I don't say it enough that those standard practices that everyone is doing that we try to repeat, although we don't do it in every webinar, are really important for this. And I think that a lot of the Halloween guidance that's coming from the state is focused on helping parents who are planning to have Halloween, small Halloween events or taking their kids out for Halloween. That's helpful for that. For more businesses, I think you're absolutely right. It's about the practices that you're already putting in place, making sure that those are carried through with whatever event or whatever special event you're planning for that. I think that's a really good point. And with that, happy to answer questions. Again, no special session this week, but there will be a Spanish language session that's released. and our general updates, please continue to come to these. We have these big information events every couple weeks, it seems, but then in between, we have a really good opportunity to talk about the details, to get into, practice questions with various businesses. And I think both are incredibly valuable. So please continue to come to these sessions. And thank you, Corinne, for hosting them. And then just, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email us at covidbiz@bouldercounty.org. And remember that if you have questions or concerns, you can call the call center, still open 9 to 2, Monday to Friday, and the number there. That's more for complaints, but definitely if you have questions, email us. With that, happy to take questions.
All right, so I'm going to start with the City of Boulder 18 to 22 order. This order technically expired tomorrow, which the Board of Health then just met about. I mean, this was literally hot off the press. We added these slides literally 3 minutes before this session started. So Lane, will you clarify that this order has been extended with some things staying the same and some things changing for this particular order, correct?
Correct. So again, for the most part, things are where they were on the old order, since we haven't had any opportunity for our metrics to improve, to start to allow more 18 to 22-year-olds gathering together. So right now it's 2 people that, again, they can go shopping together, they can be outside together, they can do anything. That's not going to trigger any issues with the order. So that's how the old order was, and that's how the current order is under our current phase of it. So again, if we start to see improvement, the order has a whole chart of ratcheting things to be less restrictive. So that will all be available that you can see. I just didn't want to dig into that right now because it's super complicated. And for business purposes, nothing is changing right now. Within 2 weeks, we hope to see things get relaxed. And certainly when we are ready to do that, we'll be able to share that probably 2 weeks from now in that session of, all right, now I think the next phase would be 4 people can be together. So again, there's not going to be dramatic shifts, but we will start to see some shifts. So again, yes, 18 to 22-year-olds can be together in groups of 2.
And that has been extended. The big shift will be the stay-at-home addresses, in which they need to submit an infection control plan in order to release their stay-at-home orders in those collegiate group properties. One of the questions is about how long it will take for that submission before they can potentially return to work.
Yeah, so there's a lot of factors there. First is when the house submits it to us, then, if we get all 32 of those at the same time, we're going to get, that'll be a decent backlog for us to go through all 32 plans. But our goal would be to get all those done ideally by Wednesday if we got them all Monday. I imagine we may not get them all on Monday, which will give us a little more of a stagger. So it might be a little bit longer than that. And then that's also contingent on them giving us kind of what we asked for. So really they're going to do an assessment. They're going to go through sort of a checklist and verify they're doing all these things and attest that they are. And then the only real thing that they need to submit to us to review is their ability to do quarantine and isolation. So that's really the focus of what they're going to submit to us. So depending on the size of the house, they have more people that they have to think about how they're going to manage, and that they need to have a plan for how they would do that. So that's really the big focus. And we're going to try to give them templates and try to assist them at doing that. We're meeting with the majority of all the houses this evening to at least give them a heads up of what's coming so that they can be prepared to submit on Monday. So again, we hope to see this go quickly, and then, but we'll see how it actually works out.
And again, this is the responsibility of those properties, not the businesses, to get them back, to allow them to go back to work.
Yeah, if you have an employee that was in that category, probably asking them to verify that they have an approved plan or something like that would make sense. Otherwise, if it's just one of the 18 to 22-year-olds that was already allowed to work, they can again continue to work. Or if it was one of those properties that will have the ban lifted tomorrow, then they again can return to work tomorrow.
Okay. And then the original 18 to 22-year-old order was revised to allow groups of two, for safety reasons. So there was a question as to whether or not a parent can go visit their student and go to a restaurant with that student or go for a hike. And the answer is yes, because that's a group of two, and they could go and be with their student or go for a hike or go to a restaurant with them.
Yes, although I think
because that technically is in that group too.
Yeah, that's all fine.
Jesse.
Again, we're really focused on the significant risk factors, and that was really the large group gatherings, especially indoors, where people were not masking, not social distancing, and that's really was the big risk factor. So if you see 3 people walking down the street and you're not sure if they're 18 to 22-year-olds, that is not what we want people calling dispatch and the police about. That's not really the concern, because you might be wrong. They might not be 18 to 22. And that's not worth trying to have police go out and respond. So they already get a number of calls that are not valid. And that's what we continue to hear day after day, is almost everything they respond to ends up not being a real incident.
We have quite a few restaurants on the call. Okay, go ahead, Jesse.
Sorry, is that, again, those under stay-at-home, in the collegiate group properties, I don't want to encourage a bunch of parents to call up their kids and say, let's go out to dinner. They're still not allowed to leave their properties at this time. So just to clarify that.
They will not be
in the non-stay-at-home properties.
Yeah.
Right. That will not be removed until they get their plans approved.
Right.
Okay.
Which hopefully is sometime early next week.
Yeah. And I know, Lane, you're working to meet with all of those properties and the collegiate groups and all of those pretty quickly, and to communicate all of these orders, which, as we said, the Board of Health met at 2:00 today, and we're having this at 3:00. So luckily we had this information to present it at 3:00 today. So we have a lot of restaurants on today's call, and so they're asking, should we continue to see 2-person parties at a restaurant? And I think the question is it 2-person parties, or is it just 2-person parties if they're 18 to 22?
Yeah, so again, this only is on that age demographic. So it's only 18 to 22-year-olds that are targeted. So anyone outside of that, all the restaurant guidance applies. So again, groups not more than 8 are allowed in a dining party outside of the 18 to 22-year-old group. So if it's only 2, you don't need to worry about their age, and that's fine. If it's a group of 5, 6, 8, now that's starting to push the envelope, then it might be worth you identifying their age.
And so one of the other mitigation strategies that was taken, but this was taken by the city of Boulder, was the 10 p.m. liquor sales that was taken a couple weeks ago, and that was set to expire pretty soon as well. So just for everybody's knowledge, that was a city of Boulder order that was put in place, and that's set to expire. Do you have any knowledge if that will be extended, or is that something we're going to need to check with the city of Boulder to find out?
Yeah, I think that will be probably something the city council and the city is going to be discussing and deciding probably today. But I do not know if that's going to be extended or changed.
Okay. Yeah, I tried to check in on that before this call, and there wasn't an update as to whether or not that would be extended. So I wasn't able to get a clear answer. I think it will need to be, it may be something that we send out a press release or any information to this group once that comes out. But that is not from Boulder County Public Health. That is a city of Boulder order. Okay, so there was a question about this 18 to 22. So you said that it's extended for 2 weeks, and then there may be some loosening after that. Could there be any loosening before that 2 weeks, or are we going to be at 2 weeks and then there would be some loosening after that?
Yeah, I think the only other milestone that happens next week is when we've been sort of in our 2 weeks of evaluation with the state. So they'll be certainly looking to see how we're progressing on our plan and that we can continue to stay as a whole county where we have been. So, so again, right now, Jesse showed everything is still for the most part favorable. We have seen upticks in other age demographics, not the 18 to 22-year-olds. So that continues to be something on our radar. But overall, we have seen a big drop off in that overall case count, in the 2-week case count. And then again, our percent positivity has dropped back down to be pretty low, even with a large volume of testing that had been happening. So that's good. And then hospitalizations is pretty stable. So everything is shaping up fairly well right now. We just need to, again, continue to weather this for a few more weeks.
And speaking of that, Josie, could you move to that chart that shows the 75 to 175 and then so the five. So we have the 5 different levels, and so the CDPHE accepted the mitigation plan from Boulder County and gave us till October 14th to get back within the 75 to 175 range. And if you go to the next slide, it shows where we are. And it shows that we're at 232.4, which last week we were like almost off in like the 400 something. At our current numbers, with 1 week left to get by October 14th, are we predicted, if we keep our numbers low, we continue to social distance, we continue to wear masks, we continue to follow these mitigation strategies, are we predicted to still stay within that, to go fall back within that yellow and be able to stay within that safer level 2?
I haven't looked at that. I know that some of the data folks have been doing some of those projections. So I don't have an exact answer. I think, again, we're definitely on track to do that. We've almost cut it in half in 1 week. So that certainly seems to suggest we have the ability to further drop that. Again, once that, again, it's a rolling 2-week average. So that really bad spot will drop off as we get a whole nother week of data. So that all works in our favor. So as long as, again, the trends stay very good, we'll be looking at 2 weeks of data that should all have pretty favorable data. So
one of the questions is, how long are we going to be in safer at home? And I think now, Jesse, if you'll go back a slide again.
Sure.
So right now our concern is to try to stay at the safer level 2, which is the status quo we've been at since May 6th. So we're trying to get our numbers back within the 75 to 175 out of 100,000 range so that we can stay in the status quo and we don't have any further restrictions. That's within the safer at home. If over time we start to improve and our numbers get better, we could move up the dial to what's called safer at home level 1, which would still be safer at home. It would just open up additional capacities. So we're still going to do things like, temperature checks. We're still going to have social distancing. We're still going to wear masks. So we're still going to follow a lot of the COVID precautions. The capacities would just change, correct?
Correct.
And I think it's important to note that that's even true under Protect Our Neighbors. Protect Our Neighbors is not a return to February. It's a return, it's again just more capacity in spaces. Not to say that's not a good goal, that we shouldn't be pushing for that, because it will mean a lot about how well we're adhering to the guidance and how well we're doing as a community. But it doesn't suddenly mean that we're back to some normal state. It's just an increase in capacity in various places.
And so just to give a reference of why we're so high again, and why the focus was on 18 to 22-year-olds. So if you only look at the 18 to 22-year-olds for that first metric, we're seeing, I think, between over 1,500 cases per 100,000. So again, that's why that's been the focus areas. That was the big driver that moved the whole metric up to over 350. Now, again, we're down to 2 something. And so as we see that other demographic drop continuously, so over that 2-week period, we should hopefully see everything be down in that safer level 2, and maybe even level 1. I doubt it'll be down that low, but But then for us to actually move to level 1, we would need to make it through our current, mitigation plan, showing all the strategies are working, then probably at least another 2 weeks showing that we're seeing continued decline cases before we would have any consideration to move to level 1. So sort of best case scenario would be at least 3 weeks. But again, we want to make sure everything is very stable before we relax things too far. So again, our goal is to start to make sure we get stability within the Boulder outbreak and not see things continue to spread through the community, which there has been some signs that that's happening.
Okay. So we know that the walk-up testing site has closed and that the drive-up testing site is closing the end of this week. Is there any plan to continue that, or are we just going to continue to have some of the other testing resources that are around our community available for people to test?
I don't know the exact date. I think that testing site is being extended. I don't think it's stopping at the end of this week, but I'll make sure we have that so that you
Okay.
can, if I can't pull it up while we're
And
still.
then one of the questions came in that there was a story on Colorado Public Radio this morning that, that they're doing less testing, which is why there's less cases. But isn't that percent positivity rate? How is it true that, partly because we're doing less testing that there's less cases, or are we really tracking some of that with that percent positivity rate? And are we still seeing that we're doing enough testing to be able to catch the cases in our community?
So I think Jesse had showed a slide. So that's definitely not true for Boulder County and the city of Boulder. Some of those statements might be statewide, but if you look at that, you can see it's the exact opposite. We've more than doubled testing in the month of September. So we have dramatically increased testing, which was one of the reasons why our overall case counts went up, because we had so much more testing. But the positivity, which is harder to see on this graph because it's that little orange line, that unfortunately did go up as well, which means now of the people we're testing, more of them actually are showing up positive. We still never got into the higher levels, at least on the dial metrics, but it still was concerning that more people are testing positive in addition to testing more people. So, but overall, that's not true for us. We've seen dramatic increase in testing, and the free testing site is scheduled right now through October 18th.
Oh, great.
So that is going at least through all of next week. So the walk-up site is the one that did close, but the drive-up site will be going at least through the 18th.
And I think there's a little confusion. I think CU was doing some of the saliva testing and some of that, but that's not technically a PCR test. Those were early diagnostic tests that then required students to go in and get a PCR test, which is it's a different test.
So that's not shown on here at all. So,
right.
So just so everyone knows, that's another reason why some of these numbers get inflated is they've been doing extensive pre-screening, and anybody that tests positive on the pre-screening then goes in for the PCR diagnostic test. So this is just all those folks, as well as those walk-up and drive-up sites. So all the other saliva testing that CU is doing is not being shown here. So that's even dramatically higher. So there is an effort to try to get that saliva-based test approved as a diagnostic. That's still in the works. So if that actually comes to fruition, you would see much higher numbers of overall tests, because again, only the people that get screened positive then get referred on for a diagnostic. So
and then there's also the pre-screening of sorry, Jesse, I was just going to say, and there's also the pre-screening of the systems and all their systems to see if it's in the waste systems and all these different diagnostic tests that they've shown across the different campuses.
And I just placed a link to the testing again for those that are looking or want to, have your staff or yourselves, get that free testing if there's a need, as well as other testing sites.
Yeah, the one thing I wanted to add that was sort of to the point of that question about testing is that in the latest public health order, it does, and this is something that public health and CU are working on, we're still encouraging students to get tested. They need to continue to get tested, and that's something that's in there as a metric. Like if we see a huge drop off in the number of students being tested, then that's a concern that we would address. So just so you're aware that that's out there and part of the metrics we're looking at.
Okay.
So the order that looks at gathering ability for the 18 to 22-year-olds, it's set up to sort of be incentivized that the more that they follow through on all the different components that are being asked of them, the more that there's a potential for again, restrictions to be released and so not be as strict. So hopefully that will continue. Right now, the students have done a good job. There has not been significant non-compliance. There's been a few issues here and there, but very minimal, nothing at all like what was happening the month prior.
So let's talk Halloween again. I actually posted in the chat the Halloween tips and tricks from the state. I think I just wanted to mention that I posted that in there. It does have the guidance, the CDC guidance, as well as CDPH here, the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. Trying not to use a lot of acronyms. I posted that into the chat and I'll send it out. I know that a lot of people have interest in this for their own personal reasons, but also businesses. This is one of those holidays that is coming up, and it will be a predecessor to other holidays that are coming up. So we will look at that. I think there's clarification. I have and I want people to look at that. There's a lot of people on these calls that they have questions for their business, but they also have questions for themselves. Someone did ask about the 18 to 22-year-old order again. They want clarification when the public health order is extended to, and when it will be revisited again.
That's a good question. I think I'm not sure that it has a finite time like the other one did.
So we know for 2 weeks it's going to stay with. It's going to stay with these just most recent changes, and then there's going to be potential gradual changes after that. What I'm going to send out, literally the press release came out like seconds before this call started. I will send it out to people on the call following this call.
Posted in the chat right now, the page.
Perfect.
Because it has some other explanation that'll be helpful too.
That's great. Thank you, Lane. So I have an industry specific question for you, Jesse. It's personal services.
All right.
So we're gonna get off Halloween. We're gonna get off public health orders. We're gonna talk personal services. So you're a hair salon, and you're looking back at the public health order, and you're starting to wonder again at that 50% capacity or 50, if what number you should go with, and how you decide how many people you can have in your facility. And if that has to include the hair salon workers, if you can double book a space, if you can have someone sitting and having their hair, drying while you have somebody else in the space, what type of, how do you figure out your capacity for that space?
Sure. So great question. So the order is 50% or 50 people, whichever is fewer. And the way you define your 50% is by the fire code capacity of the room in which it is occurring. So that sets up how many people are allowed in that space. There were a lot of questions early on about, like, what if I have a separate room with a door? Is that a separate space? Yes, that is a separate space. So that also has a capacity that is set by the fire code. So I hope that answers the question in terms of that is the number of people you are allowed to have in your space. so find out from either your landlord, or if you know your capacity, it's 50% of that.
So as with any of those capacities, so now that was personal services, but when you start to look at those capacities and it says 25% or this, 50% or this, whichever's lower, you need to go with whichever's lower. And that's, that is the rule, correct?
Yes. And that's a really good, important thing to remember for every industry, is the way every industry's capacity is set up is they give you two numbers and it's whichever is lower. So a lot of spaces have 50 people, but you really need to look at your capacity based on the fire code.
And you need to make sure you can maintain that social distancing. If you are, you do have somebody, getting their hair set while someone else is using that seat, and then you're going to have someone coming back in that seat. You need to make sure you do proper disinfecting and all of that stuff. So you need to make sure you're following all of the other public health protocols, within all of your decisions that you make, correct?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's a really good reminder that there are a lot of disinfection guidelines and rules that are going to limit the amount of quick changes you can make. And so I would be hesitant to think about double booking or double using a chair over an appointment, just because of the number of times you need to disinfect between uses.
And the reason I'm bringing this one up is because I get a lot of calls like this. And I think what's happening is that when we moved to a cross industry and we started to do more of the general updates, and we started talking about numbers and public health order updates, is we started to just go about business as usual. And we may at points just want to go back and just remember some of those key pieces, because we're 7 months in, we're 7 months into COVID. We're, I don't know how many months into these, 5 months into these stay-at-home orders, and just remembering some of those steps, so that as you get creative or do something a little different, we remember those pieces that you have to implement or have in place as you manipulate your space or look at your winter operations and things like that.
Definitely. And I will, unless something exciting happens next week, I'll try to, we did this it's probably even a month and a half ago now. We did a sort of quick look back at the regulations and sort of the major points for most industries in terms of practices. And I can do that next week while still hitting some of these major details about operations that I think are important from the new public health order and anything else that comes up. But it's a good reminder that it's worth, even you in your day-to-day operations, going back and checking those regulations every once in a while, because it's so easy, like Corinne said, to fall back to our previous behavior.
Well, even HVAC systems, we can't keep our windows open, and we can't, like now that it's becoming winter and, we're having to move inside, what are some things that we can do to remember? How do we, remember some better practices? So just some thoughts out there, and just a reminder to people on the call that, we just have to think about it a little differently as we move into the winter months. And then my final PSA is get your flu shot. All right, I'm going to give a second to see if there's any final questions, because as you guys know that I say that and there comes a last question. Do either one of you have any last minute reminders or comments?
I just appreciate the continued commitment for those folks that are joining and all your efforts, because again, we need the whole community to be part of this solution.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, looks like we're going to end on time. Have a wonderful week, everybody. It looks like we'll have a little bit of an enhanced session next week with a little bit of reminders about some of the different industry changes or steps. An update on the mitigation plan and where we are on the dial. But as always, I want to thank Lane and Jesse for their commitment to our business community and giving us these updates. And thank you everybody for joining us and continuing to join us in between these sessions. Email us your questions, call the help center. I heard that you guys had a lot of calls last week, so if you can't get through, you can email, and everybody will try to answer your questions as quickly as possible. So thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks everybody. Thanks Corinne. Thanks Lane.